argument that if there are embarrassing discrepancies among in the Bible, why would early Christians and why would they put them together and say it's the Bible, although there are obvious differences?
Yes, it's a great question. Why did the early Christians not look at these discrepancies and say this is a problem? Why did they include them in the same, in the same covers as the Bible? It's a really good question, and I think that actually different early Christians had different answers to that. One early Christian in the 2nd century was a guy named Tatian, whose answer to this was that you've got these 4 accounts, and this guy Tatian actually produced a Life of Christ in stereo for Syriac reading Christians in the 2nd century. He took the 4 Gospels and he put them together into one big gospel and reconciled them all together with one another in a book that was called the Diatessaron, which means through the 4. You take the 4, and through the 4 you get the big gospel. So that was one way of dealing with a problem. Some Christian authors thought that if you have contradictions between these texts, then what that is the Holy Spirit telling you that you need to look for the deeper meaning of the text, because the surface meaning of the text obviously doesn't work. And so it's God telling you need to look for the deeper meaning of the text. And the reality is that most Christians in the 2nd, 3rd centuries down to today never realized that there are differences. I mean, most people read the Bible and don't realize that there are differences. And I think it was that way in the early church too. In fact, most of these people couldn't read anyway. So, I mean, it wasn't that they could do a careful analysis of the Synoptic Gospels. They couldn't read the Gospel. So they heard them read in church, and they'd hear a story one week, and then another story next week, another story the next week, and it didn't occur to them that there are discrepancies. And so this idea of kind of finding these discrepancies in a way really wasn't the issue for most of these early Christians, I think.
One more question. Can you give the reference to what just claimed about the illiteracy in the early Christianity? And
yes, the illiteracy of early Christianity.
Can you just give me references?
The best study of literacy in the ancient world is William Harris, and it's simply called Ancient Literacy, published by Harvard University Press. He doesn't deal very much with Christianity, but he does say a few things about it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I've come across a couple of radical pieces of information on the Bible I wonder if you'd comment on. One is that, I've read this in several places from biblical historians. One is that there was a get-together called the Second Council of Constantinople in around 555 AD. And it was one where they did some major deletions in the Bible, and they took out just about everything Jesus said about reincarnation. That's one of them.
Well, that one's easy. That's false.
Okay. One of the places I read this is in a book called A Jesus Mystery by Janet Bach. I don't know if that means anything to you.
Right. Don't read those books. Okay.
Okay. And in all due respect, how are they wrong and you're right?
Authority.
That's it?
I mean... There are responsible historians, and there are people who are not responsible historians, and it's a very good question actually, because how do you know the difference? You go to a bookstore and you've got these books. I mean, and some have nice covers and some don't have nice covers. How do you know who? And it's actually not an easy thing, and you have to know who to trust. And so one thing to do is look at credentials. Where do these people teach? Do they teach? Where did they get their degrees? Do they have degrees? Or are they independent researchers? An independent researcher is somebody who doesn't have a degree usually. Why don't they have a degree? So they might be telling the truth, but where do they get their information from? Look at their footnotes and see if they tell you where they got their information from. And then read scholars who teach in reputable institutions, who have reputable degrees, and whose books go through the kind of vetting process that is typical in scholarship, which is that you can't, anybody can publish a book today, but scholarly presses publish books that have gone through a scholarly process of evaluation. And that's the kind of book you want to read if you want an authoritative account.
Okay. Yeah, and the second piece of information was that there's 18 years that are missing from the Bible, basically from the age of 12 to the age of 30. And it's been said that was deleted, and that he spent those years traveling through India and visiting with various holy men and so forth,
right,
and reaching a state of enlightenment,
right,
and then coming back to...
Yeah, that, you can even find gospels that claim that. These gospels were written in the 19th century, but I mean, you can at least find gospels that say it. There are 18 years that are unaccounted for, and the question is, what would Jesus have been doing during these 18 years? And what most historians think is that he would have been doing what any Jewish lad in a small hamlet in Galilee would have been doing. He would have been working every day. Probably a carpenter, or apprenticed as a carpenter, and he probably didn't travel. Jews. I mean, he was very poor, probably a hand-to-mouth existence, and probably worked 6 days a week. And on the seventh day, you couldn't go anywhere because it was the Sabbath. So my guess is he just grew up in Nazareth. And there are no ancient sources. I mean, you asked me how do I know this? I've read all of the ancient sources. There are no ancient sources that say anything about Jesus going to India.
Yeah, I just find, given the stature of this man, that the fact that there was zero written about him in those 18 years is very suspicious to me. I just think there must have been a deletion somewhere. I mean,
yeah.
Why didn't somewhere in the Bible it said, well, from the age of 12 he just spent the time with his father in his shop and doing this and that, and then all of a sudden emerged at 30 and did all these miraculous things. So anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
My question concerns essentially languages. If I understand correctly, and I'm not a biblical scholar, but I've done a little bit of work, most of what is written is from 30 years, the earliest would be some of the earlier letters of Paul, to 60 and further on years later after Christ passed on, much of which is either in Greek or in Latin. And in spite of what the governor of Texas was purported to have said in about 1923 in a trial on bilingual languages, they had that same problem when she threw a Bible down and said, if English was good enough for Jesus, then it's good enough for our students. I suspect that Jesus didn't speak English and actually spoke the language of the common people, since he was actually trying to talk to the common people, which, if I understand correctly, in first century Palestine was Aramaic. And there are very few Aramaic texts around. So could you comment on what's missing between what was actually said and the codices that we're actually trying to decode, and with no reference to Da Vinci Code here, decode as being what he might have said.
Yes.
In fact, I don't believe he spoke English, so he did not say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. No. And in fact, I think Neil Douglas Klotz and a bunch of others in this Aramaic movement are trying to do something along these lines. So could you comment on that and where you stand there?
Yeah, so, no, it's absolutely right. Jesus spoke Aramaic. My opinion is that he did not know Greek, and that he did not know Latin. I think he probably knew Aramaic. The Gospels are written in Greek, so already when you're reading the Gospels in Greek, you're a step removed from the words of Jesus, assuming that the words that are being recorded are actually words that he said, because they're written 30 or 40 years later, and maybe some of these words weren't things that he actually said. There are sayings in the Gospels that make better sense if you retranslate them into Aramaic from Greek. I mean, it's tricky to do. I mean, but it's fun too. So so give you an example. There's a saying that doesn't make very good sense in Mark chapter 2. I'll use the sexist phrasing of this because it's the one people are familiar with, and it's one that it's easier to make my point. Sabbath was made for man, not man for Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Okay? Sounds like familiar. But it doesn't make any sense. Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. What's the therefore? Because it doesn't work. Well, but if you say it in Aramaic, the word for man, meaning human being, and the word for Son of Man is the same word, Barnashah. Sabbath was made for Barnashah, not Barnashah for the Sabbath. Therefore, Barnashah is Lord of the Sabbath. That makes sense. So you retrovert it into Aramaic, and it adds up. And there are other sayings, just as a side, so you need to do that, actually, if you're doing the historical Jesus study. The other side of that is, there are some things that cannot be retroverted back into Aramaic, which means Jesus probably didn't say them. Give you a famous example. Every World Series behind home plate, you get somebody holding up a sign, John 3:3. You must be born again. This is a very interesting passage.